A black Genesis sedan, a faded yellow line in a courthouse parking lot, a police sergeant standing in the afternoon sun with a smile that did not belong on a man wearing a badge. It looked like a small thing at first, the kind of petty insult most people would swallow because fighting it would cost more than the car was worth. But this time, the wrong car was taken. This time, the man left standing on the sidewalk was not helpless, not lost, and not afraid. He was Malcolm Avery, the first black state's attorney Briar County had ever elected, and before the week was over, that missing car would become the loose thread that pulled 6 years of corruption into the light. Briar County had always been two cities wearing one name. On the west side, the streets were clean, the trees were trimmed, and police cruisers rolled slow like they were guarding treasure. Porch lights stayed on, store windows stayed whole. People called the police and expected help to arrive. But across the river, on the east side, the same badge carried a colder meaning. There, blue lights in the mirror made mothers hold their breath. Young men learned early to keep their hands visible, even when they had done nothing wrong. Cars were stopped for cracked plastic, dim bulbs, loud music, hanging air fresheners, and sometimes for no clear reason at all. Complaints vanished into drawers. Officers with bad records kept their jobs. Families learned that justice had a front door, but not everyone was welcome to walk through it. Malcolm Avery knew that truth before he knew the law. He had grown up in a narrow brick row house on Wilmont Street, where the winters pressed against the windows and the summer heat made the whole block smell like asphalt and cut grass. His mother had worked double shifts at the county hospital. His father had driven city buses until his knees gave out. Malcolm was the boy who carried groceries for old neighbors, who studied at the kitchen table while sirens cut through the night, who watched friends get searched on corners for standing too long in their own neighborhood. He had not forgotten any of it, even after college, even after law school, even after the suits, the courtroom wins, the newspaper profiles, and the careful smiles from people who once would have crossed the street to avoid him. Malcolm remembered. That was why his campaign had scared the old power in Briar County. He did not run like a man asking permission. He ran like a man returning home with a key. At every church basement, union hall, barber shop, and school gym, Malcolm said the same thing in a quiet voice that carried farther than shouting. No badge would be treated like a crown. The line followed him everywhere. Some people repeated it with pride. Some repeated it with fear. Some spat it like a curse. By election night, when the east side turned out in numbers the county had not seen in a generation, the line had become more than a slogan. It had become a warning. Sergeant Wade Harlan heard that warning loud and clear, and he hated every word of it. Harlan had been on the Briar Police Department for almost 20 years, long enough to believe the city belonged to men like him. He had a thick neck, pale eyes, and a way of smiling without warmth. His uniform was always crisp, his boots always polished, and his record always clean on paper, which was the only place it looked clean. In real life, Wade Harlan was known on the east side the way a bad storm is known. People did not always say his name out loud. They just said, "Watch out if Harlan is working tonight." He had a gift for turning simple stops into long, humiliating lessons. He could make a driver sit on a curb in the rain. He could dump a glove box onto the sidewalk. He could call a search consent after making refusal feel impossible. And whenever someone complained, the old chief found a reason to call it unfounded. The police union protected Harlan like he was family. The old chief protected him like he was useful. And for years Harlan repaid that protection by keeping the east side under pressure. He knew which blocks to circle. He knew which cars to follow. He knew who was too poor to hire a lawyer and who was too tired to file another complaint. But Malcolm Avery changed the air in the county courthouse. Within his first months as state's attorney, he began reviewing cases that had been built on illegal searches. He dismissed charges that never should have been filed. He asked judges to examine traffic stops that smelled wrong. He sent letters demanding body camera footage. He talked about outside oversight in public, where cameras could record the words and the old police leadership could not pretend they had not heard them. To Harlan, this was not reform, it was disrespect. Every dismissed case felt personal. Every review felt like an insult. The worst part was that Malcolm never raised his voice. He did not thunder at press conferences or pound tables in court. He simply read the record, found the lie, and let the law do its work. That calm bothered Harlan more than anger would have. Anger could be answered with anger. Calm made him feel small. The afternoon it began was warm for October, with sunlight sliding across the courthouse windows and turning them the color of brass. Malcolm had spent the morning in court, then most of the afternoon in a meeting about a new policy requiring prosecutors to review officer misconduct histories before accepting cases. It was not glamorous work. It was slow, careful, boring in the way real change often is. By 4 o'clock, his head ached from coffee and legal language. He stepped out of the courthouse with a folder under one arm, thinking only about getting back to his office, answering 3 calls, and maybe making it home before dinner got cold. His black Genesis sedan was parked in the county employee lot beside the courthouse, or at least it had been. Malcolm knew exactly where he had left it, beneath the crooked security camera near the back fence, his official parking placard hanging clearly from the rearview mirror. The space was legal. The placard was current. The painted yellow lines near the curb had been faded for years, leftover markings from an old emergency access lane that no one used anymore. County workers parked there every day. Judges parked there. Clerks parked there. Police commanders parked there when they wanted to avoid the public entrance. Nobody cared until Wade Harlan decided to care. Harlan had been sitting in his cruiser across the street when he saw Malcolm pull into the lot earlier that day. He knew the car. Everybody at the department knew the car by then. It was hard not to recognize the vehicle of the man who had made half the police force nervous. Harlan watched Malcolm step out in a navy suit, watched him adjust his tie, watched him walk toward the courthouse with that calm, steady stride that made him look like he owned the building. Something sour twisted in Harlan's stomach. He told himself Malcolm thought he was better than everybody. He told himself Malcolm needed to be reminded that the streets did not answer to campaign speeches. The more he sat there, the more the thought grew, until it became a plan. He did not radio for a city tow. He did not call dispatch first. He did not write a citation. He did not even walk inside the courthouse to check who owned the car, because he already knew. Instead, Harlan pulled out his personal phone and called Redline Recovery, a private tow company that answered him on the second ring like they had been waiting. The truck arrived 30 minutes later, red paint faded, chains rattling, diesel engine coughing like an old smoker. Victor Rourke, the owner of Redline, climbed down from the cab wearing wraparound sunglasses and a sleeveless jacket despite the warm air. He and Harlan spoke near the rear of the sedan, low and familiar, 2 men sharing a joke no one else was meant to hear. Rourke looked at the placard, then at Harlan. Harlan shrugged. Rourke grinned. The hook went under the front axle. The chains tightened. The Genesis gave a rough lurch as the tow arm lifted it too fast, scraping the lower bumper against the pavement with a sound that made one courthouse clerk turn her head from across the lot. Harlan watched the whole thing with his thumbs hooked in his vest, his mouth set in a small, satisfied curve. He did not leave a notice. He did not place a ticket under the wiper. He just watched Malcolm's car disappear through the gate, like he had restored order to the world. When Malcolm reached the lot that evening and saw the empty space, he stopped walking. Not suddenly, not dramatically. He simply stopped, the way a man pauses when a familiar sound in his house goes quiet. His eyes moved from the empty rectangle of pavement to the faded yellow curb, then to the camera above the fence, then to the little scrape marks where his tires had been dragged. Around him, county employees moved toward their cars, laughing softly, calling home, shaking keys in tired hands. The day was ending for them. For Malcolm, something else had just begun. He took out his phone and called dispatch. His voice was even, calm enough that the young dispatcher did not understand at first why her supervisor suddenly leaned over her shoulder. Malcolm gave his plate number. There was a pause, the clacking of keys, another pause. Then the dispatcher returned with a careful tone and said the vehicle had been towed at the request of Sergeant Wade Harlan for blocking an emergency access lane. Malcolm looked again at the faded curb, at the empty space, at the county employee sign mounted 10 feet away, blocking an emergency lane. The lie was so lazy it almost felt insulting. He asked for the tow company. The dispatcher gave him the name Red Line Recovery and an address on Harbor Road, down near the old rail yards. Malcolm thanked her, ended the call, and stood still for another moment. A younger version of him might have felt heat rise in his face. A younger version might have called Harlan right there and demanded answers. But Malcolm had learned a long time ago that some traps only worked if you stepped into them angry, so he did not give Harlan that gift. He opened a rideshare app, took 4 photographs of the parking space, then took 3 more of the faded curb and the security camera. When the car arrived, he got in without saying much at all. Red Line Recovery sat behind a chain-link fence, topped with curling wire, tucked between a tire warehouse and a closed machine shop. The place looked less like a business than a place where things were brought to be forgotten. Rows of cars sat under dusty floodlights, some with flat tires, some with broken windows, some still carrying school stickers and baby seats, and fast food cups left behind by people who had not expected to lose them. Malcolm saw his Genesis near the office trailer, front bumper hanging slightly loose on one side. The damage was not huge, but it was enough. Enough to show force, enough to show carelessness, enough to show that whoever took it never imagined they would have to explain themselves. Inside the trailer, the air smelled like old coffee, motor oil, and damp paper. Victor Rourke sat behind a scratched desk with a cash box open beside his elbow. He was a heavy man with a thick beard and a voice that sounded friendly only if you were not listening closely. He did not ask Malcolm how he could help. He looked him up and down, recognized him, and smiled like the evening had just become entertaining. Malcolm said he was there for his vehicle. Rourke tapped at a keyboard with 2 fingers, sighed like Malcolm had inconvenienced him, then slid a paper across the desk. The total was $535. Cash only. Tow fee. Gate fee. Administrative fee. Overnight storage. Malcolm glanced at the paper. Overnight storage, he said softly. Rourke leaned back in his chair. That's the rate. It has been here less than 3 hours. That's still the rate. From the back office came a low laugh. Malcolm turned his head slightly, just enough to see through the half-open door. Sergeant Wade Harlan sat in a cracked vinyl chair with one boot resting on a file cabinet, a paper cup in his hand, looking as comfortable as a man watching his favorite show. Their eyes met. Harlan did not look surprised. He looked pleased. For a second, the trailer became very quiet. Outside, a dog barked somewhere beyond the fence. A truck hissed along the road. Malcolm could feel the shape of the moment. Harlan wanted anger. He wanted Malcolm to raise his voice in front of witnesses who worked for Rourke. He wanted a story he could repeat later, something about the new state's attorney throwing his weight around over a parking violation. It was a childish game, but childish men with power could still do damage. So Malcolm did not argue. He counted out the cash, placed it on the desk, and asked for a stamped receipt. Rourke's smile thinned a little. Malcolm asked for an itemized copy of the charges. Then he asked for the tow authorization. Rourke hesitated before printing it, and that hesitation told Malcolm more than the paper did. He photographed the receipt. He photographed the fake storage line. He photographed the damage to his bumper under the yellow floodlight. He photographed the yard, the office, the posted fee sign with half the numbers taped over, and the small handwritten note near the cash box that said no cards accepted. Each click of his phone was quiet. Each one made Harlan's smile fade a little more. When Malcolm finally stepped back outside, the evening had deepened into a blue-black dusk. Rourke opened the gate with a remote. Harlan came out of the office behind him, no longer laughing, but still trying to wear that hard little grin. "Rough day, counselor?" Harlan called. Malcolm opened the driver's door and looked at the damaged bumper one more time. Then he looked at Harlan, not with fear, not with anger, but with a calm so complete it made the sergeant's grin twitch. "It was useful," Malcolm said. Harlan frowned, as if the answer had landed wrong. Malcolm got into the Genesis, started the engine, and drove slowly out of the yard. In the rearview mirror, he saw Harlan and Rourke standing under the floodlight, watching him leave. They thought they had embarrassed him. They thought they had shown him who still controlled Briar County after dark. But as Malcolm turned onto Harbor Road, his mind was already moving through the details. The personal phone call, the private tow, the cash-only demand, the fake storage fee, the missing citation, the officer sitting comfortably in the back office of the company that had taken his car. By the time he reached the first red light, Malcolm no longer saw a petty tow. He saw a pattern waiting to be uncovered. And somewhere in Briar County, without knowing it yet, Wade Harlan had just handed him the first clean piece of evidence. By the time Malcolm Avery reached his office the next morning, the courthouse had not fully woken up yet. The marble floors still held the coolness of the night, and the long windows along the east hall glowed with the pale grey light that came before sunrise. Janitors moved quietly with carts. A clerk carried a stack of files against her chest. Somewhere down the hall, a coffee machine hissed and clicked like it was trying to warm the whole building by itself. Malcolm walked past all of it with the same calm stride he had carried into courtrooms for years, but there was something different behind his eyes now. The missing car had not made him feel small, it had given him a door. He closed his office door, set the stamped receipt on his desk, and placed the tow authorization beside it. Then he opened the photographs on his phone one by one. The faded curb, the county placard, the scrape marks on the pavement, the crooked fee sign at Redline Recovery, the cash-only notice, his damaged bumper under the floodlight, the image of Wade Harlan's cruiser parked near the tow yard office, half hidden behind a dented metal fence. Every detail was quiet by itself. Together, they made noise. Not the kind of noise that filled a room, but the kind that worked its way into the walls until the whole building began to tremble. At 7:30, Malcolm called Tanya Brooks into his office. Tanya had once worked as a criminal investigator for the IRS, and she carried herself like a woman who knew secrets were never as buried as people believed. She was in her early 50s, with silver threaded through her dark hair and eyes that could make a bank manager forget his own password. Tanya did not rush. She did not guess. She followed numbers the way hunters followed tracks in snow. When she stepped into Malcolm's office and saw the papers lined up across his desk, she did not ask if he was angry. She knew Malcolm well enough to understand that his anger became most dangerous when it became organized. He told her the whole story from the beginning. The employee lot, the fake emergency lane, Harlan's personal call, Redline Recovery, Victor Rourke's cash demand, the false storage charge, Harlan laughing in the back office like a man watching a show he had paid to see. Tanya listened without interrupting. Only once did her face change, and that was when Malcolm slid the receipt toward her and tapped the line that said overnight storage. "That car was there 3 hours," Malcolm said. Tanya picked up the receipt, held it under the desk lamp, and smiled without humor. People who steal with paperwork always think the paper makes it clean. Malcolm leaned back in his chair. "I want every tow Wade Harlan has authorized in the last 6 years. I want the company, the location, the reason, the date, the final disposition, and whether the owner got the car back." Tanya looked at him for a long moment. Outside the office, the courthouse began to stir, voices rising, shoes tapping, elevators chiming. Inside, the air was still. "You think this is bigger than your car?" "I know it is." That was all Tanya needed. By noon, she had pulled the first batch of records from Dispatch and Public Works. By the end of the day, she had enough to make the room go quiet. Wade Harlan had authorized more tows than any sergeant in the department, not by a little, but by a margin so wide it looked unnatural. Almost all of them went to redline recovery, even though Briar County had a required rotation system meant to stop exactly this kind of favoritism. Harlan had bypassed it again and again, using phrases that sounded official but meant almost nothing. Obstructing emergency access, hazard condition, abandoned vehicle, suspicious registration, public safety removal. The locations told an uglier story. The towers clustered on the east side like dark spots on a map. Blocks near the housing courts, streets outside apartment buildings, corners near small churches and laundromats, parking lots behind clinics and discount stores, places where people needed their cars to get to work, to school, to dialysis appointments, to overnight shifts, to second jobs that paid just enough to keep the lights on. On the west side, cars got warnings. On the east side, they vanished. Tanya kept digging. She called clerks. She pulled auction records. She compared dates. She found cars marked abandoned only 2 days after being towed. She found hydrant violations on blocks where no hydrants existed. She found expired registration claims on vehicles whose registrations were active in state records. She found one tow listed as blocking a school entrance on a Saturday evening in July, when the school had been closed for summer, and the vehicle owner had time-stamped photographs proving the car was in a legal space. The owner had been a nurse. She lost the car at auction after Redline added fees faster than she could save money. 2 weeks later, she lost her job because she could not get to the hospital on time. Malcolm read every file Tanya put in front of him. He did not skim them. He read the names. He read the addresses. He read the letters people had sent, begging for a review, asking why the police had taken the one thing that kept their lives moving. There was a father who lost a pickup truck he used for roofing work, a grandmother whose car was towed from outside her church during choir rehearsal, a young man who missed 3 probation meetings after his car disappeared and nearly went back to jail over transportation he no longer had. Each case had been treated like a small problem, a fee dispute, a clerical issue, a misunderstanding. But Malcolm saw the shape now. This was not random. This was a machine. The real break came 4 days later, just after sunset. Tanya entered Malcolm's office without knocking, which told him the news was serious. She placed a thin folder on his desk and said nothing at first. Malcolm opened it. The first page was a corporate filing for Redline Recovery. The second showed partial ownership by a company called Harbor Street Holdings. The third showed Harbor Street Holdings registered through a small law office 2 counties away. The fourth page carried a name that made the entire room feel colder. Leonard Voss, Wade Harlan's cousin. Tanya sat down across from Malcolm. Voss has no real office, no real employees, and no business that I can find except receiving money from Redline Recovery. Then Harbor Street sends consulting payments to a home improvement company owned by Harlan's brother-in-law. That company sends money to Harlan through loan repayments that do not match any loan documents. Malcolm looked at the papers for a long time. He felt something settle in him, heavy and clear. His car had not been towed because Wade Harlan wanted one bad afternoon. His car had been towed because Harlan had become so comfortable stealing from people that he no longer knew how to hide it. That night, Malcolm did not go home early. He sat alone in his office after the building emptied. The city spread beyond his window in small lights and dark streets. On the west side, the lights looked soft and golden. On the east side, they flickered between old buildings and narrow roads, the same streets where he had once walked home with library books under his arm. He thought of all the people who had stood at impound counters, counting cash they did not have. He thought of the quiet panic of a mother realizing the car seat was inside a car she could not afford to release. He thought of Harlan, laughing in that back office. Then he picked up the phone. The first call went to the state attorney general. The second went to federal civil rights investigators. By morning, Briar County's little towing problem had crossed a line Harlan could not control. Malcolm did not hold a press conference. He did not warn the police chief. He did not give the union time to wrap its arms around Harlan and smother the truth. He moved quietly, carefully, the way a good prosecutor moves when he knows the target thinks he is still safe. For the next few months, Wade Harlan lived inside an invisible net. He drove the same cruiser. He made the same stops. He leaned into car windows with the same cold smile. He called Redline Recovery from his personal phone, still believing that personal meant private. He drank coffee in the back office with Victor Rourke, still believing that locked doors meant silence. He talked about the East Side like the people there were objects to move, punish, and sell off one vehicle at a time. He did not know federal investigators were listening. He did not know they had bank records, GPS data, dispatch logs, auction paperwork, and ledgers that placed him at the center of the whole operation. He did not know Victor Rourke had grown nervous enough to start saving copies of everything, just in case someone needed to take the fall. The recordings were worse than Malcolm expected. In one call, Harlan ordered a tow from outside an apartment building before the car had been parked long enough to violate any rule. In another, he laughed about a single mother who had cried at the impound window because her work uniform was locked in the trunk. In another, he asked Rourke if his piece would be ready by Friday. His voice, so confident on the street, sounded almost lazy when he spoke about ruining people. That was what struck Malcolm the most. Not the cruelty alone, but the ease of it. Harlan did not sound like a man committing crimes. He sounded like a man collecting rent. As the investigation tightened, Harlan grew restless. Men like him could feel power shifting even when they could not see the hand moving it. Malcolm kept dismissing bad cases. Tanya kept requesting records. Rumors moved through the police department like wind under a door. Harlan began to believe Malcolm was pushing harder because of the tow, and that belief made him careless. One rainy night, he pulled over Grace Turner, Malcolm's deputy, as she drove home from a late hearing. Grace was careful, sharp, and not easily frightened, but even she felt the old fear when blue lights filled her mirror on an empty road. Harlan approached her window slowly, rain sliding down the brim of his hat. He did not give a real reason for the stop. He asked where she was coming from. He asked why she was out so late. Then he leaned closer and told her to give her boss a message. Accidents happen to people who push too hard. His voice was soft enough that he thought the rain would swallow it. It did not. Grace's phone, lying face down in the cup holder, recorded every word. The next morning, Grace played the recording in Malcolm's office. Tanya stood near the window with her arms folded. Malcolm listened once, then asked her to play it again. Harlan's voice filled the room, calm and threatening, wrapped in rain. Malcolm did not speak for several seconds after it ended. When he finally did, his voice was low. He had his chance to stop. Tanya nodded. They usually do. The raids came before dawn on a Thursday, when the sky was still dark and the city had not yet decided what kind of day it would become. Federal agents hit Harlan's house, Redline Recovery, and the Harbor Street office at the same time. Harlan was asleep when the pounding started. At first, he thought it was a bad dream, some deep knocking from inside his own skull. Then the front door burst open, and the hallway filled with light, voices, and the hard sound of boots. He stumbled from his bedroom in a t-shirt, shouting that he was police, that they were making a mistake, that they needed to call the chief. An agent placed him against the wall and cuffed him before he could finish the sentence. For the first time in years, Wade Harlan said his title, and nobody cared. At Redline Recovery, Victor Rourke folded faster than anyone expected. The moment agents opened the filing cabinets and found the ledgers, Rourke started talking. He gave them the cash splits. He gave them the auction dates. He gave them the fake invoices, the shell company documents, the handwritten notes, the extra receipt books, and the names of every officer who had looked the other way. He did not do it out of honor. He did it because prison had become real to him, and men like Rourke were loyal only while the walls stayed far away. The trial turned Briar County inside out. People lined up outside the federal courthouse before sunrise. some wearing church clothes, some work uniforms, some holding photographs of cars they had lost years earlier. The West Side watched on the evening news like the story belonged to another country. The East Side watched like a locked door had finally cracked open. Malcolm did not personally try the federal case, but he sat in the courtroom through the most important testimony, not in the front row like a man seeking attention, but quietly, to bear witness. One by one, the victims testified. A school bus driver described paying Redline with grocery money and feeding her children noodles for 2 weeks. A mechanic described losing his tools when his van was auctioned off. A grandmother spoke slowly, hands shaking, about choosing between medication and getting her car back. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. The truth was heavy enough. Then Tanya took the stand. She explained the money in simple words, the way she always did. Redline got the tow. Redline collected cash. Redline sent money to Harbor Street. Harbor Street sent fake payments through friendly companies. The money came back to Harlan, washed just enough to look clean to anyone who did not know where to look. Tanya did not use dramatic language. She did not have to. By the time she finished, the jury had seen the whole road from the East Side curb to Wade Harlan's bank account. Victor Rourke testified next. He looked smaller in court than he had in the tow yard, his beard trimmed, his suit too tight, his eyes fixed mostly on the table. He admitted that Harlan chose the cars. He admitted the violations were often fake. He admitted the cash fees were inflated on purpose, because desperate people paid faster when they were scared. He admitted that cars belonging to poor owners were pushed to auction quickly because those owners were less likely to fight back. Across the room, Harlan stared at him with pure hatred. Rourke did not look over. But the moment that ended Wade Harlan came from his own mouth. Prosecutors played the recording of him laughing about a woman whose car had been legally parked outside her apartment. The courtroom went still as his voice filled the speakers, loose and ugly, joking about how she could walk to work if she wanted to keep her job so badly. In that moment, Harlan's face changed, not with remorse, with recognition. He knew the jury had heard him clearly. He knew there was no police report that could soften that sound. His defense collapsed soon after. There would be no heroic stand, no righteous speech, no final claim that he had only been doing his job. Wade Harlan pleaded guilty to federal corruption, extortion, wire fraud, and civil rights violations. At sentencing, he stood before the judge in a plain suit, looking older than his years, his eyes fixed on the floor. His lawyer spoke of stress, public service, and a career with good moments. The judge listened, then spoke of trust. He spoke of the badge. He spoke of citizens targeted not because they were dangerous, but because they were vulnerable. Then he sentenced Wade Harlan to 12 years in federal prison. Harlan lost his badge. He lost his pension. He lost the right to ever work in law enforcement again. Redline Recovery was shut down, its trucks seized, its yard locked behind federal notices taped to the office door. Harbor Street holdings vanished under court orders and asset freezes. The money that could be recovered went into a victim compensation fund, and for the first time, people who had been told to forget it received letters saying the county had not forgotten after all. But Malcolm Avery did not stop at one dirty sergeant and one crooked tow company. The case had shown the whole city what the East Side had been saying for decades. The lawsuit that followed forced Briar County into change it could no longer avoid. An independent police accountability board was created with subpoena power. Tow records became public. Traffic stops were audited. Body camera failures had to be explained in writing. Complaints could no longer disappear into the same office that wanted them gone. The old police chief resigned on a rainy Friday, with no cameras beside him and no honor left to protect. Several officers tied to the cover-ups were removed. A new chief took over, a quiet woman from outside the county who began her first press conference by saying that trust was not owed to a department. It had to be earned. Years passed. Briar County did not become perfect. No city does, but something had shifted. On the east side, people still watched police cars when they passed, but the fear was no longer as lonely. There were records now. There were hearings. There were names attached to decisions. There was a place to take the truth where it did not have to beg before being heard. Malcolm knew reform was not a sunrise. It was a long road with potholes, detours, and people waiting in the shadows to turn the city around. But the road was real now, and that mattered. Then, one winter morning, a letter arrived at Malcolm's office from federal prison. The envelope was thin. The handwriting was stiff and uneven. Malcolm knew who it was from before his assistant said the name. Wade Harlan was asking for support in a sentence reduction. He wrote that prison had broken him down. He wrote that he had found humility. He wrote that he had suffered enough. He wrote that Malcolm, as a man of justice, should understand mercy. Malcolm read the letter twice. He did not laugh. He did not tear it up. He sat quietly with it in his hands, thinking about every person Harlan had left stranded, every mother at an impound window, every worker who lost wages, every family that paid cash they needed for food, every young man made to feel powerless on his own street. He thought about Harlan in the back office of Red Line Recovery, laughing while Malcolm stood at the counter. He thought about that first fake tow authorization, the paper that had started it all. Then Malcolm opened the old case file, removed a copy of that original authorization, and placed it on his desk. The false emergency lane, the date, Harlan's name, the small lie that had exposed the larger one. Malcolm took a pen and wrote 4 words across the page. Denied. Serve the sentence. He folded the paper, sealed it in an envelope, and sent it back. That afternoon, Malcolm left the courthouse a little later than usual. The sun was low, and the county employee lot was washed in soft gold. He walked past the place where his Genesis had once been taken, under the color of law. The fake emergency lane was gone now. The curb had been repainted. The parking signs had been replaced. The old camera had been fixed and aimed where it should have been aimed all along. There was no cruiser waiting across the street, no tow truck hiding near the gate, no officer watching with a smile that did not belong on his face. Malcolm stopped for a moment beside the space, his hands in the pockets of his coat. Around him, courthouse workers headed home, keys in hand, voices tired but easy. Across the river, the east side lights began to blink on, one window at a time. He knew the work was not finished. It never would be. But justice had moved through Briar County like a quiet storm, and it had left the air different. Wade Harlan had tried to use a badge, a lie, and a tow truck to humiliate one black man in a parking lot. Instead, he exposed the hidden machinery of an entire department. He thought he was reminding Malcolm Avery who controlled the streets. What he really did was hand Malcolm the proof he needed to take those streets back. And in the end, the same city that had once learned to lower its eyes began to look up again.